Welcome to another episode of Conversate and 8. I'm your host, Laura Jones, and today we'll be discussing veterans issues. Welcome, John Brandon. Thank you so much for taking this time with us today.
Thank you for having me, Laura. I really appreciate it. My name is John Brandon Pierre. I served for 12 years in the Marine Corps. I was with 1st Marine Division, 7th Engineer Support Battalion. I served in Iraq in 2003 for the invasion of Iraq. I did one tour there. I gone on after that to start a business, degree in psychology, and ran for office in 2018 for district clerk in Montgomery County.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, can you start off by telling us how life is different going from being an active duty officer or someone that's in active duty to coming back to civilian life?
Yes, so that's a great question, and it's a big one. Big questions are good. So when I got out after 12 years of service, I was a sergeant of our Marines, and so that's on the enlisted side. So a lot of things, like, this is a very, very big topic, and that's because you have a lot of different areas that need to be, I guess, unpacked. So you have reserve Marines and you have active duty Marines, two very different mindsets that go to service. And then with that, you have enlisted Marines and you have officers, right? Now, the reason why I'm breaking these down this way is because this affects the way that we see our needs, right? If you're active duty and you are an enlisted person, private, PFC, Lance Corporal, specialist for the Army, airman. If you are enlisted, your boots on the ground, resources are, usually very, very important. Gear is important. When you're active duty during that time, you're looking for the person that can give you the best resources and training. Resources and training means saved lives. It means doing your job more efficiently. It makes life a little bit easier. Different branches, of course, bring a different perspective to that. When you're an officer, from the officers that I've worked under, your ability to lead has a lot to do with the connections that you make, your ability to communicate, your ability to step out in front and actually lead from the front. And given the resources that you need, you can do that either easier or harder. A lot of veterans sacrifice, and sometimes, whenever we say we sacrifice, it doesn't resonate because people don't understand how that sacrifice happens. As soon as you put on the uniform, as soon as you take the oath of service, you give away basically your First Amendment right. So no longer you don't have a right to freedom of speech, you don't have a right to freedom of assembly, right? And that's because you are serving the country as a whole, whether it's one side of the political spectrum or the other side of the political spectrum. So when it comes to that, a lot of times, like, for example, I served under Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. And for many of us, it's all the same. And that's because we see the policies, and those policies affect our lives based on, if we're going to end up overseas, if we're going to end up, being stateside, are we going to go to war, right? And it affects our families as well. So a lot of veterans don't see a political side. They just see a giant machine, right? They see people that have wants, and usually those wants don't necessarily include us. So that leads me to another issue, a big issue, and that's that a lot of veterans, when they get out, they have a lot of veterans when they get out, and this is more for the enlisted side. The idea is that I've been serving for X amount of years, and during those years, you're a tool. You're a tool of the government. You're used by the government, you're government property. So when it comes to after that service, that time, right, where you've got your family now, you've got your freedom to do what you want, say what you want, go where you want. A lot of us just want to be left alone. It's very difficult to get us back involved, and that's because a lot of times there's burnout. and that lasts years, right?
So when you
There's a
say
lack of,
involved, do you mean just involved in daily life, like having a job and interacting with people on a social level?
oh yeah, that political, social, job, you name it. A lot of times we're given a lot of responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
and that responsibility has real consequences. For example, as a sergeant of Marines, I was responsible for my junior Marines both on duty and off duty, right? You'll be very hard pressed to go to a job in the civilian world where your boss is in your life both on duty and off duty. It's like, hey, after 9 to 5, don't call me. But in the military, though, they're designed to be your safety net. They're designed to guide you, but that guidance happens through emulation. In other words, as a sergeant, I have a warrant order that tells me that I have to be on 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I have to be the person that I want you to follow. And if I don't be that person, there are consequences to that.
Hmm.
So it's very difficult. It's like a culture shock when you come home because now you have civilians who use terms like freedom and they use terms like patriotism and they use all these like flashy words. And a lot of times in the veteran community, we're like, okay, yeah, we hear you, but you're not saying anything. The words are hollow,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because one side doesn't really care about the other.
Yeah.
There's a lot of apathy. And a good example of this is that when you're active duty, we have this saying in the Marine Corps where we don't have black and white, we have different shades of green, right? And it's interesting because you'll see Marines come from all over the world or all over the country, well, the world too, different ethnic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, right? Different educational backgrounds, and they form a cohesive unit. Their job is to form a cohesive unit. In other words, your job is to do your best for the person to your left and to your right. I had an experience when I was overseas in Iraq, and I had a sergeant who was right next to me in a 7-ton and a 7-ton vehicle, and we were catching fire. And I knew going into that moment, even though there's chaos everywhere, that if I don't do my job well, then either one of us may not go home.
Mm-hmm.
He'll never see his family. He has a wife. He has beautiful kids. That's going to affect his entire family. And that becomes the reason why you do what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that that's only for a season, right? So we go into service, we do this, this awesome work, we do all this stuff, we do crazy things that we would never think of that we could, never think of that become our C stories, right? And then you come home and you go back to this divided country, right? Where I got people who I served with who, found it difficult to go back home because at home there's prejudice. At home there's racism, and their families and their friends and their societies are saying, hey, this is what we see and this is why we feel this way. And many times that veteran's like, hey, you know what? I fought with people that look like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here today having dinner with you because of someone of that skin shade. So it becomes a very complex situation. And when you hear about everyone what they're arguing about, you're like, wow, okay. So is this something I want to get involved in?
Yeah.
Right? I've already been used. I've been used by the government for X number of years, however long my service is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now do I want to be used on the left or used on the right? Or do I want to be left alone?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that is that once you get out, your priorities change, right? When you're in, the focus, the needs of active duty are the needs, how do I put this? The needs of active duty personnel is focused on the job, right? And it's very focused on the job. So if someone says, hey, we're going to cut military funding, the question is where,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you're not specific about where, then while you think that you're cutting military funding for the general's, a few acres of, beautiful fencing on the general's ranch on some base somewhere, you're actually cutting funding for the training for those guys who are putting their lives at risk. Or in the situation of OIF 1 back in 2003, you're not giving armor to those people who are being shot at,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the question ends up being, where are you going to cut funding? And this is where a lot of times veterans step back and they go, you know what, I shouldn't even get involved, because I know that civilians are not going to be specific about those things because they don't think about those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking about childcare, and you're thinking about civil rights and stuff, and you're thinking about all these other things. But we're thinking about this piece of armor that I've got that's a hand-me-down from Vietnam, right? that won't stop certain types of rounds that we have now.
Mm-hmm.
And we went into firefights with sandbags for armor. We went and bought our own armor, right? I'm talking about the biggest, most capable military on the planet. And the boots on the ground are buying their own armor because the people at home won't think deep enough to make sure that they're funded, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yet we can throw money everywhere else. So it jades our view. And then once we get out, the needs change. They go from armor and things that we need to get the job done to my family, my health, right? My ability to be successful and lead a successful life. Now, there are some advantages, right? Like, for example, if you're on the officer side, you get out and you have a good network. You know, a lot of officers and enlisted personnel are highly educated. The more that you stay in the military, the more educated you become. A good example of that, you remember Adobe Flash technology?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A Marine grunt wrote that.
Wow.
Not made it, wrote the code for it. His
Wow.
name is Charlie Jackson. And like things like that blow our mind, you know. The famous book Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Awesome investor. He's a veteran.
Wow.
30% of the Fortune 500 is owned by veterans. It's owned by, actually, that 30% is owned by Marines, and we get laughed at. We Crayola eaters, but but the whole thing is that the longer that you stay and the more you train, the more you stay educated.
Mm-hmm.
So when officers get out, usually they have a very good network, a very high level of education, and there's a pathway to another job or another career. On the active duty side, the lower you are in the rank, the more difficult it gets to find a new job or to find a new career or to have a network,
Mm-hmm.
right? These are guys that come home after serving at war and go to the oil field. You know, these are guys that come home after war. They have disabilities, and all of a sudden, because of trauma, PTSD, things of that nature, they can't. How do I put this? They can't cope as well with civilian day-to-day politics.
Mm-hmm.
Craziness at work, right? Bad leadership, horrible communication, right? People that are ungalvanized, right? Don't know how to come together as a team, right? Can't take criticism. People that don't know what they want, or they have unrealistic expectations about what they want. They see you come in as a veteran and they say, oh, we love veterans. And I like to say this a lot. People love veterans. Country loves veterans. They don't like it once we start to work.
Mm.
Because once we start to work, we bring that mindset with us. We'll be there early. We're very, very focused. We're very stern. We're very straight. For most of us.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's that communication issue, right? And that's why a lot of veterans are like, well, I'll talk to my veteran friends or not, but it's really difficult to connect with civilians.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see a lot of the social issues going on, and we're like, wow, like this is just crazy. One person that I wanted to mention was my first commanding officer. My first commanding officer was Susan Bird. Now, Susan Bird is amazing, right? She's one of the most awesome people that I know. And she was one of the first women to lead Marines into combat, like history book stuff, right? But at the same time, she's also LGBTQ. So like when civilians talk about like, women in the military, LGBTQ in the military, they're talking about it with the mindset of what they see and what they experience, not what veterans see and what veterans experience. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not, right? Given the branches, things are handled in different ways, and they can all be improved upon. And usually in the military, when there is something like that or not, things go up the chain. Notice how I said usually. Things go up the chain, they get handled, and things roll back down. Mm-hmm. Our military is something that's constantly evolving, right? Constantly changing, constantly growing. And it grows usually at a faster rate than the things that are happening on the civilian side, because we have a job to do, we have to stay ahead of the game, and we have to stay, agile. So those like that experience, that lifestyle has a really hard time meshing with the civilian experience and the civilian lifestyle. We find ourselves wanting to be isolated, and many of us do isolate. We go find a patch of land somewhere that has a cabin on it, and we're like Mark Wahlberg in Shooter. We just go out in the middle of nowhere and we're like, okay, as long as I've got 360, and I can see in 360 degrees, I'm good. So leave me alone. But that's not realistic. Mm-hmm. You do need to be involved, and you do need to be, of all the people that we have, that we can utilize, the experience we can utilize, veterans are an untapped source.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm sure that you had the option to move to a piece of property and isolate yourself. So what helped you make the decision to integrate back into society and get a job and interact with civilians on a daily basis?
Oh, I'm a glutton for pain. Actually, I've answered this question before. Everything I've done in my life has a certain theme to it. And I think everyone's life choices does. And my theme has been service. Mm-hmm. It's what got me it's what got me into the Marine Corps. It's what got me into my own company in the fitness industry, because I wanted to give back. After my experience active duty, I wanted to do something that helped elongate and better people's lives. After that, I got into mental health because I wanted to serve again. I want to serve people in a more direct way, and help where I see a problem. And that means that I have to first take care of myself. Mm-hmm. And just to make sure that my mental health is taken care of. I have to make sure that my needs are taken care of. My goals in life are realized, established, and I'm working for them. That way I can help somebody else. And that meant that I couldn't isolate. Mm-hmm. I teach cognitive behavioral modules as we spoke about earlier, but I've been in therapy for 18 years. I recommend cognitive behavioral therapy. There's lots of organizations attached to the VA. I use the Vet Center in Houston. They're amazing. And that helps you deal with the issues that you're facing. I'm of the mindset that every person, every biped mammal needs to be having some type of therapy, and that's just so we can deal with issues that arise. Not saying that someone has a problem, just that we're human beings, and if you put physical stress on your body, there will be moments of trauma, and your body will need help to recover. You go see a doctor, right? If you don't go see the doctor, or you don't take care of yourself, you end up breaking your body, and then you have a bigger problem, right? And in mental health, we've done the same thing. We've ignored it long enough to where it's become a large social problem. I mean, it's made a lot of people famous online, but but yeah, it's a really big situation. But those are the things that got me active, though, because those were things that I saw, and I was like, this is something that I can have an impact on. This is something I can help with, and that gives me a sense of worth and a sense of value. I tell people at work, the best job I ever had in my entire life, and I'll never have a better one again, is being a sergeant of Marines. I did my best to perfect myself at that position of leadership. And granted, when that's what you love, you try and bring that energy wherever you go, And sometimes that's difficult because you see areas where you have leadership that could be better,
Mm-hmm.
but doesn't know how to take criticism,
Yeah.
right? You have leadership that is flawed in areas where there's insecurities. You have racial insecurities. You have gender insecurities, right? You have a lot of projection. People feeling pain, and the first thing that they want to see that pain so that it validates that their feelings are correct.
Mm-hmm.
And veterans do this too, right? If I feel like I've been serving for X amount of years and I feel used, I feel taken advantage of, then when I get out, I'm going to see the things that make me feel like, okay, you know what? I'm right for isolating, because we got on one side, we got, liberals on the other side, we've got conservatives, and neither of them want to shut up and listen,
Mm-hmm.
right? Neither want to work together, neither want to cross the aisle. And as a veteran, you have to cross the aisle, you know what I mean? And not just politically, you have to cross the aisle religiously.
Mm-hmm.
I tell people that my last unit, I had everything in it, and we had people whose families and their beliefs were on the left, families and beliefs on the right, everything from Protestants to Catholics to Wiccans to Celtic. I had a guy that was a Celtic Druid, right? And so like you have all these different walks of life and types of thought, but what makes it all work is that at the end of the day, everyone's like, we're here for a job. We have a common goal, we have a common mission. And in order to complete that mission, we can't let insignificant differences, because at this point, those differences are insignificant. We can't let insignificant differences make us retreat to our camps and not work together. Everyone has something that they bring to the table. And if leadership can see those things, they can tap each person for what they bring, then we have a very strong team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a country, we forgot that. We've drastically forgotten that. We have people from all over the world here, and they all bring different viewpoints and they all bring different things of value. But because we're so focused on the thing that we need validation of,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's gender, whether it's social, whether it's economic, we don't look at what someone else is saying that might actually be something that helps us out.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, and this is part where like it gets a little like it gets manipulated,
Mm-hmm.
because we do, right? We get out and we're like, oh my God, like if you guys could all just shut up for a minute,
Yeah.
you know?
Or I'm punching people in the face.
Right? Yes. And like our method of communication is usually abrasive.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're very direct. I'm not going to talk to you in between the lines, so that you're trying to, dig for the meaning. And this is even across the board, right? Male veterans, female veterans. This is why female veterans have a particularly hard time reintegrating with civilian women.
Mm-hmm.
They're seen as more masculine. They're ostracized a little bit, well, a lot in some cases,
Mm-hmm.
because of the fact that they're more direct. They're very, very goal oriented. They're extremely focused. These are like the strongest women that our country has, bar none.
Yeah.
Everybody else, you have a lot of people, and I know I'm talking about women here, so you have a lot of people that want to build themselves up,
Mm-hmm.
to be that, boss chick, or, that strong woman. But I'm not saying that these are the only strong women that we have, but they are some of the strongest,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Physically, emotionally, mentally. They are all around capable. And part of the veteran population that gets, I want to say, is like invisible,
Mm-hmm.
are female veterans, because of that ostracization, because of the things they have to deal with, in the military while wearing the uniform, and then have to deal with on the outside, as a veteran. A lot of them don't feel comfortable saying, "Hey, you know what? I served."
Mm-hmm.
So they just kind of like hide it a bit, and that's one of the things that I try to actively go out and talk to. Like, they're amazing people. They're amazing women. Many times when we think about veterans, we think about men, and
Yeah.
that's just from history. You
Yeah.
know, from history, more service members have always been men. You
Hmm.
know, our draft was male centered. You know what I mean? Whether you like it or not, as a man, you have a responsibility to fight if the country needs it. You
Hmm.
know, and then you have women who make that choice on their own.
Hmm.
You know, they're not required at 18 to go and, you know, serve, you know, sign up for the draft. And that might be changing soon, but currently it's not a requirement, you know. So they're making this choice on their own.
Yeah.
And that's even a bigger sacrifice, you know,
Wow.
because they're not choosing. I don't want to say they're not choosing comfort, but they're not choosing a more comfortable
Hmm.
route.
Yeah.
The one of the things that like stays in my memory was the day that I met at that time Captain Bird. At that point, she was a captain. We were doing a PFT, and this was on Camp Pendleton in California. And usually, like PFT is like, you know, something that Marines are they're very touchy about, right? Because
What
they
is
do want to even
PFT? What does PFT
um,
stand for?
a PFT is a physical fitness test.
Ah,
So
okay.
every Marine has to do a physical fitness test, right? Have to
Mhm.
maintain a certain level of combat readiness. So a lot of Marines are very big on equality too. So they're like, hey, you know what? Men have to do a full arm hang pull-ups, 20 of them.
Hmm.
Well, 3 minimum, 20 maximum. And you go from full arm hang to full chin break in the bar. And for the ladies, we had a lot of ladies who were not at that point that had the option of doing the flexed arm hang, right? You go up, chin above the bar, and you see how long you can stay there, right? When the arm locks out, the time stops. Higher time, higher score.
Hmm.
And then we're like, that's not fair. It's not fair. So
Equality.
right. So if you see something that breaks that norm, you take interest, you know. And I remember we were at a PFT field, and the line for guys is super long, you know, and everyone's waiting for their turn. And all of a sudden, we see a ponytail fly up, and we're like, wait, that's not. There's no male Marine over here that has a ponytail. Like everyone's got a high and tight. What is this? And you see it again. It happens 20 times, not
Wow.
once, not 3 times, 20. And
Wow.
we're like, who the hell is that? And she got so much respect, right? Like so much respect because she's like, hey, I want to show them that, you know, they can trust me with their lives.
Hmm.
And that's the mark of a good Marine Corps leader,
Hmm.
you know, being able to lead from the front. And that's another issue that, you know, veterans have when they, or service members have when they come out.
Hmm.
They're used to their leaders leading from the front, you know, being decisive. There's a saying in the military, but when it comes to leadership, that the wrong decision is better than no decision.
Hmm.
A wrong decision you can learn from.
Hmm.
You know, there might be a consequence, but you can learn from it. And a lot of times it's seen more leniently than if you make absolutely no decision.
Hmm.
And on the civilian side, a lot of times when you see leaders, they're like, well, I don't want to make a decision yet because it might be wrong.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And it frustrates the hell out of us, especially if they're politicians
Hmm.
and they can't make a decision.
Yeah,
That's going to frustrate us,
yeah.
you know.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Well, can we talk a little bit about the district that we live in, District 8? So, and I'm sure
Yes.
there's similar opportunities to do a better job with veterans all over the United States. But within our Congressional District 8, what are some of the, what do the vets in our district need, in your opinion?
Honestly, I really think that veterans in our district need a voice. Um, this is something when I was running that I gave some thought to. That's something that I try to bring to the table, and that's that when it comes to veterans' needs, there's not enough of a voice.
Hmm.
If you have a lot of veterans that have gotten out in their 30s, 40s, 50s, you know, like this is the OIF generation is getting older, right? They moved from active service and now they're solidly veterans, most of them.
Hmm.
And a lot of them are in District 8. A lot of Marines come from Texas.
Hmm.
So we run into each other every once in a while. But the needs are things like making sure that we have resources for veterans,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, do we have mental health available to veterans? And PTSD is still a huge deal. Some of us are a little touchy about PTSD, and that's because it used to be veteran centric.
Mm-hmm.
You know, before it was PTSD, it was shell shock,
Mm-hmm.
and it was supposed to be a very, very, very severe form of trauma,
Mm-hmm.
right? Bombs going off, your friends being shot. I was in therapy with a guy once who, and this is heartbreaking, who enlisted with his best friend, went to war with his best friend, and his best friend died in his arms, and he was covered in his best friend's blood, and he couldn't wash it out of his camisole, and he still lives with that thought. He still lives with that. Like those are his nightmares. And these are things that veterans we're very good at compartmentalizing,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll put it in the box and we'll try and stuff it down and say, you know what, I'm just going to keep marching on,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm going to wake up. I got this. I'm going to keep moving forward, one foot in front of the other. I'm not going to fall out, right? And then all of a sudden something breaks. And when something breaks, there's nowhere to go. There's no one to call. Sometimes you have a veteran group of friends and whatnot, but then, it's kind of like, you're all talking to each other about the same thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then if you try to reach out to like the VA or something like that, there's a whole lot of bureaucracy, and that bureaucracy isn't made by veterans.
Mm-hmm.
It's made by civilians,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm of the mindset that veterans ought to run the VA. I know that civilians love veterans, but the VA would run so much more smoothly if it was run by veterans, because they would understand already what's needed.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something that we don't have. At least we don't have that in a District 8.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have someone to take that position, or not, or make them feel as though their voice is being heard and their needs are there, so that when veterans see that their needs matter, they will voice them more.
Mm-hmm.
Until then, they're like, I can survive. So that's what I'm going to do. I've been trained how to survive, not how to thrive,
Mm-hmm.
but just how to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I think that would be great in District 8 is a focus on reduction of psychoactive medication.
What would be a replacement for psychoactive medication? Therapy or?
Yeah. So cognitive behavioral therapy is, I think, the golden standard. It's actually right now, as far as psychology is concerned, like this is where we are right now. Cognitive behavioral therapy is the top tier right now. And this is what I've been doing for 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's work. It does not, it doesn't prescribe drugs. There's no drugs. You're dealing with the issues. You're dealing with the issues that are deep down, buried, and you're actually working. You have homework. You have things you have to do. There was a time when I couldn't walk into a grocery store on a Sunday at noon, and it was just because there were so many people, right?
Yeah.
There were times when I would be going out with a friend and I couldn't sit with my back to the door
Mm-hmm.
because I had anxiety. There were times when I couldn't go to the movies to watch a certain movie if the setting of the movie was in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't go.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that would be something that just wasn't going to work. And through that therapy, those issues have been dealt with. There's a lot more leeway. I can do a lot more now. And a lot of times veterans don't take that route
Mm-hmm.
because it's never offered to them.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, when they go in for help, they hear things like, oh, well, you're having trouble sleeping? Here's something for that. Oh, wait, hold on a second. We gave you the drug for going to sleep, so let's give you the drug for getting up in the morning, right? Because you're going to be flat in the morning. So we gave you the drug for being flat in the morning, and then instead of giving you something for anxiety, like throughout the day that you can take, like when you have those moments, let's give you something that's, more, it's like, opiate based and whatnot, that's going to have you hooked on it, and it's going to make you addicted to drugs, right? And you go from 2 medications to 5 medications. Those medications have side effects. You have 6 medications and 8 medications.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're having issues with your family,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your family life starts to deteriorate because you're medicated.
Mm-hmm.
Your marriages start to deteriorate because you're medicated,
Yeah.
and that medication creates more anxiety. It creates sexual issues in our relationships, and those issues create more stress, and now you've got more medication to go with it. Before you know it, you're on 20 different medications, and many of those medications, here's the I guess you can say, was it the joke, right? Many of those medications have a side effect of suicidal tendencies.
Mm.
So when we hear about, veterans committing suicide 22 a day, a lot of that's not because we went to war. A lot of that's because we have people in office, and we have people in legislature, we have people in government who say we love veterans, right? But then they go and they say, what? I'm going to go listen to the pharmaceutical industry who's got a new drug that we're going to sell to veterans not to handle something new, some new symptom.
Yeah.
Or we have too much of this old drug, this old generic drug. So what's a good way to get rid of it? Make veterans swallow it.
Mm.
Right? We all know what it's like to be guinea pigs.
Mm-hmm.
All of us. So that's something that District 8 could do and could lead with. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and I mean, like most of the veterans that talk about wanting help, the door is open. Mm-hmm. They show up and they're like, okay, this is what's going on. What are you going to do for me? Mm-hmm. Right. And for many of us, going to the VA is like, okay, well, I hope this is service connected, because if there's a chance in hell that it's not going to be service connected, they will take that chance in hell. And again, that comes from a system that's not run or led by veterans. When money gets involved, we fall to the wayside. Mm-hmm. Drastically. And this is one of those things where veterans understand this. It's not something that we talk about because we maintain a certain posture. Mm-hmm. But it is something that we're all knowledgeable of. And sometimes we will do things like we'll have a little group, of us. We take care of ourselves. We take care of our fellow veterans or whatever. But then at some point in time, you're going to need that system. And that's something that in the district, the country as a whole, is really missing. We could do better.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can always do better. Yeah, this has been a great conversation. Is there anything else that you want to talk about or bring up?
Oh, dude, we got tons. We got tons I could talk about. Oh, we can talk about homeless veterans, homelessness.
Oh, yes, let's talk about homeless veterans. That's an important thing.
Oh man, so so a lot of times this journey to homelessness starts in high school. All right. And again, this is one of the situations where your officers we're not really talking about the officer population. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because when officers get out, they have a network. Mm-hmm. Usually they go from a military job to a similar civilian side job. Mm-hmm. Right. Active duty, especially at the bottom of active duty, they don't. Mm. Right. So you're talking about someone that may have a high school level education, but with a lot of training in various areas. Now that training doesn't equate, except for the Air Force, that training doesn't equate to a college degree. Okay. Usually you walk out with more experience than your college counterparts. Mm-hmm. And you walk out with more training than your college counterparts, because you've had the book side of it, and then you've had the practical application side of it. Mm-hmm. Right. You've used what you've learned. So when you get out, there's nowhere to go. Some guys, because they're dealing with PTSD and end up on medications, get hooked on drugs and become what? Homeless. Mm-hmm. Because when your life, let's say you get out, you find your job, that's going well, right? You've got your wife, you've got your kids and everything, and all of a sudden PTSD strikes. Mm. You've got night terrors, you wake up screaming or not. Your wife comes, she rolls over, honey, are you okay? And next thing you know, what happened, right? In your mind, the guy from your deployment just touch you on the shoulder, right? Because you're still asleep, and you end up assaulting your wife. Mm-hmm. Or hurting someone you love, or some other situation. And you end up on medication, or you can end up in jail, right? Which then, that's a negative. That's a whole negative situation in and of itself. But a lot of these issues lead to homelessness, because if you're medicated, you can't be sharp you're less sharp at work. Mm-hmm. You end up losing your job. You end up having a harder time being socially coherent. So you end up on the outside of that social sphere. Mm-hmm. Once you lose your job, you lose your family, you're homeless.
Mm.
You have nowhere to go. And you have a lot of veterans who, because of addiction that was brought on by their service, though, they end up nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And because of how the military is, we're very hard on one another. We are very hard on each other. So the idea is you pick yourself up, you clean yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you keep marching, right? I don't care if there's pain. You pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you make it work.
Mm-hmm.
That is how we see progress many times. And it can be destructive because you can be going through a lot and you won't give yourself the leeway to be human.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the expectation, that bar that we place for each other is still very high. So a lot of times there's not an infrastructure there to help those veterans. And most of the time that means that they can't be on certain medications. Don't give veterans opioids. We can start there, right? Don't give veterans opioids. We deal with things like pain. We deal with things like discomfort. A lot of times, and everyone has the joke about, Motrin and water will fix everything, right? Because that's what we're taught when we're, serving.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you get out and you end up that person with 20 pills, your life is bound to go somewhere negative.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have civilian counterparts who understand, and we're hard on ourselves and one another. So those people that fall out, they're living on the street. There's no way for them to get back into society or get back on their feet or get clean.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that every district has that. And if we led with trying to fix that, by investing in things like mental health,
Mm-hmm.
invest in things like, the VA services or whatnot, and make it not to where you need to go to the VA, right? The VA or those services can find you.
Mm-hmm.
I used to tell people that it's funny because whenever we go to combat, the Red Cross can find anybody,
Yeah.
right? They can find anybody. We have services that will find people
Mm-hmm.
and take care of them, but we don't use it.
Mm-hmm.
We have this expectation, I think, as a country, as Americans, that you will work yourself to death. And if you work yourself to death, then maybe after working yourself to death, you can maybe get lucky and have a well life.
Mm-hmm.
But the hardest workers in this country are some of the poorest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And veterans fit right into that. So, yeah.
I mean, it's, I don't know, this is such a great conversation.
We should have a part two. I like writing some
You
stuff
should
down.
have a part two. I really appreciate you taking time to explain a lot of these things to me. I don't have the perspective because I don't have the experience of being someone that has served. So this is it's a really important thing. And I appreciate you taking this time.
Oh, you're welcome.
John Brandon Pierre is doing the work in his community, and there are many communities across our district, District 8. I'm running for United States Congress in 2022, and I believe that the person elected to represent us should be present and involved in many communities across our district, District 8. In this upcoming race, I can use all the help that I can get. I firmly believe that putting our communities first is putting America first. I'm asking for your vote in 2022. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'll see you next time.